Good morning, everybody. An absolute honor and pleasure to be with both of you here today. And thank you for that very inspiring speech.
And I need to say, very inspiring Icelandic. She pronounced my name perfectly, which is not common anywhere in the world.
No,
Thank you.
so I thought I would kick off the panel, a bit more, for the audience to learn a bit more about your personal journeys, to where you are today as to women in power. Growing up, did either of you ever dream of being a minister or joining the government? Perhaps you could share, what brought you, to here today.
Yes, should I start? Thank you so much. I maybe did not dream of it, but when I was younger, I always looked at politics something I would do when I was older. I mean, I just saw the role models, and they were as old as my parents or older, and I looked at it as the final thing to do in life, to go to politics, and then your life would be over. But when I started to be active in the political party, I thought it would. I looked at the group and I saw that the average age was over 50, but the average age in our country is about 37. And I asked the people in the parliamentary group, like, why aren't there more young people? And of course, they didn't have the answer for it. So I decided to run at a 24-year-old as a second chair of my party against a sitting male MP, and asked them if they meant it, that they said that they trusted young people to leadership positions. And they did, and he stepped back. So I won, and then I went to parliament a year later, and I was appointed minister at 28.
And did the outcome surprise you, or did you just think, okay, the Icelandic people are voting on their feet?
When I was at the party conference at 24, I thought it would be more of a punk. My speech would be more like they would think about it and do it later. I did not believe that the outcome would be that I was a second chairman of the biggest party in Iceland when I was still a law student. So, but I saw that then that they were able to change, and it's also important that the leadership and the males in the politics trust young people and women, and they take steps in gender equality, like my chairman did when he decided many years ago to always bring as many women and male to the government. And then he has done so by appointing 2 young women ministers in the government, me as well as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, that is now 35 years old and has been in government in, I think, 7 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that serves as a role model, I think, for a lot of us here who, like you, think that politics is for when we are much older. And Siman, may I ask, what really drove your journey into politics? Was that something planned, or was it serendipitous? Like share with us a bit more.
Sure. I think in Singapore, we already see women participating in many professional fields, including in the public sector, and increasingly, I think in many fields in private sector too, you see women not just being very present, but also taking on leadership roles. However, I think Singapore, being an Southeast Asian, East Asian society, I think it is still politics is still a field that perhaps women might feel some hesitation before entering, and for many reasons. I think that the demands of politics on women's time, especially when very often the people who might be very suitable for politics, the women who might be suitable for politics, I think they also tend to be the ones who are already juggling multiple roles to begin with: career, family, leadership roles in their professions. So I think that there is this natural hesitation is something that we have to work at to overcome. And in my case, I was one of those people who used to lament we don't have enough women in parliament. I wish there were more women in politics, making decisions. And so when I was approached to run for politics, actually my instinct was also to say no. I had a lot of reasons to say no. I was very happy with my work. I had family commitments. My children were young. But then a thought occurred to me that if I keep saying no, then I will lose my right to complain about there not being enough women in politics in future. And then I thought I have to be consistent. If I believe in this, and then when I'm asked and I say no, then how can I then be surprised that we don't have enough women representing our interests in parliament? So I'm in, and many of my fellow sister politicians made the same decision. They made the leap, and I'm happy to say in Singapore now we have close to 30% elected representation from women. We can do better still, and I say this so that for those of you in the audience, if you're approached, to consider politics, please don't say no to us, or at least don't say no straight away. Give it some thought. Give it some thought, and I hope that over time there will be more voices. There will be an even better balance of male and female voices, and I think together we can make better decisions for Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I'm glad they managed to persuade you. I want to talk a little bit more about Singapore and Iceland and our efforts towards gender parity. Two small nations, but punching, I believe, above their weight. In many areas across. Your portfolios are in higher education, science, and innovation, and yours in national development and foreign affairs. Yet, what you guys both have in common is a shared passion of advancing women in leadership in technology and innovation. Iceland has been named, I think, for 13 years running, I think, the most gender equal country in the world, topping the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap report this year. And I think that, in the last year, we in Singapore have unveiled a white paper on women's empowerment, a nationwide effort to promote gender parity. So I thought maybe you could share a little bit about Iceland's efforts in the past 15 years in closing the gender gap. What has been key national efforts and policies which have contributed to being number one on that list? And Siman, maybe you can share with us what is our national blueprint for advancing gender parity going forwards, because I think that was that white paper was historic for us.
Yes, there's no one solution that fixes the problems very easily. It's a long story of hard work of everyone to get closer to closing the gender gap. And even though we are, like some say, champion in gender equality for 13 years, we are not done. We still need to do better, and it's really important to remember, so we also move forward. But at the same time, we believe that around 2035 we will be able to close the gender gap, which is over 120 years before the world can close it if we move as slow as we are moving. So what have been the main and maybe the most important figures and laws to get there? I think the support of women to both be able to have a family and stay in work. That is both affordable childcare and maternity and paternity leave that is split between both parents. And that the father in the household, he comes as well. He is as well active in the household's projects. Of course, we have also put down some barriers, about 40% of women in boards in the industry and so on. But I think the mindset is the thing you need to work, everybody need to work the hardest on, that doesn't come easily. And a variety in a group is always a better group. If you have the same type of a man in a group, you can just have one man. So I think variety, both in age and in gender, will always get us to a better decision and a country that is more like their people. And we see that especially in tech, where we can't let all the men do the artificial intelligence because we don't want the system to think like a man or for a man.
You
So we
talked
need
about
women there as well.
you talked about changing mindsets being the difficult thing, right? So you know, I really liked, you know, what you talked about equal responsibility in the household, apart from, you know, parental leave policies, right? What work did you guys do to change that mindset? Because I agree with you, policy is only one level.
Yeah, and you need to change it from all the sides as well as within. And I thought when I was appointed a minister at 28, Minister of Justice, like what will Iceland gain from that? To have a young female minister in that ministry, which is sometimes quite old and tough atmosphere. And I said, put it in forefront to fight for gender equality in the justicial system. I appointed 2 women Supreme Court, so it's equality now in our Supreme Court for the first time. I appointed as well first woman as a national commissioner, and I didn't point these women out because they are women, but because they are great. And they will change the system within, which is really important as well. But there is also this digital phase that Siman came in her speech, which I was which I feel a lot because as an innovation, as a gender equality, you are really happy about technology and all the opportunities you get with technology. But as a minister of cybersecurity and also gender equality, it's sometimes quite frightening what the tech can do. So Iceland, with a law I made when I was a Minister of Justice, is now in forefront in protecting sexual privacy of women in the internet. So, like Simon mentioned, when you use photos for sexual abuse and send it out without allowance, it is now a jail time in Iceland, and that is very clear. That is also abuse to send pictures that you're not allowed to send, or even just threaten it is now a clear code in our penal codes. So leading that way in supporting the technology, using the upside of it, at the same time we need to grab the other side of it and protect women on the internet as the same time as we of course support as much free speech as we can.
Thank you.
I think in Singapore, many of our policies are pro-women in outcome, although they might not have been described as such. Earlier, I talked, for instance, about safety and security. I think having safe streets would disproportionately benefit women, because if our streets were not safe, then you're going to find, and I think we've seen this example elsewhere, that women would more often than not be the victims of crime and of harassment. And in terms of education access, in terms of access to jobs, again, I think in Singapore, quite a lot of progress have been made in this area. So I think with the white paper, it focuses women's minds on looking for those other areas which might not have been the focus of policy making or even lawmaking before, but what are we able to highlight in order to move ahead? I'm so glad the Minister Aslaug also shares the same perspective, for instance, towards online harms. So that's one area that we have identified, and we've started to also make some moves towards to tackle. But at the same time, I think that there remains, for instance, workplace practices, the solidification of more policies that allow flexible work, that recognizes the challenges of balancing between caregiving and paid work. I think all of these would help, and in fact have been also raised by my colleagues in the white paper. And one other point that I would like to raise is I think it's very important for us to do this together with men. Many men do support the advancement of women, and I think that it's ultimately also about changing mindsets in society. Changing laws is important, changing practices is important, but ultimately I think it's about changing mindsets. And I think men are very much a part of the solution, and having that sense of working very closely together, harnessing everybody's commitment and support is critical. And I think that would really help in moving forward. As a mother of boys, I feel this very keenly because my boys are growing up, and they are also encountering discussions about feminism, in school. And they come to me sometimes and say, "Mom, I think I'm part of the solution, but I don't want to be part of the problem." And I say, "Okay, that's great. That's a great place to start." And I thought it was also a timely reminder to myself, and also I think to other women who are working on the cause, to I think always make sure that we have men and boys with us.
Absolutely, and I absolutely loved your story about how it was, your chairman, right? Who appointed two female, ministers, two young female ministers, right? I want to go back to the question on the type of legislative support that we need for a gender equal society going forwards, right? The biggest obstacle to gender equality is misogyny. And actually, at She Loves Tech, we want to be mindful that technology doesn't become an enabler of misogyny. I think that's one of the things which left the deepest impression on me when we first talked, over lunch. And that's also why She Loves Tech's mission is to encourage more women to build tech, so technology doesn't become a tool or enabler for that. Do you think that, what type of policies do you see that we need in Singapore, for example, on workplace, or on like you mentioned, online harms? Perhaps you could share some of the work that I think you're doing to spearhead that, which I think is incredibly brave.
Well, thank you for the support, Virginia. I think that in terms of what we need to do to foster greater collaboration between, for instance, social media platforms, internet companies, and our activists, as well as regulators, I think the roadmap there is pretty clear. And the passing of our online safety bill yesterday, I think that also signifies increased attention in this area. I would just like to add one more, which is I think it's also about getting more women's perspectives into the tech sector, especially in critical functions where it matters. I'm reminded of a recent conversation I had with a woman in the tech space who once worked in a very well-known internet platform company. And the point she wanted to make was that she felt we needed more women working in those departments that decided the algorithms of what content gets amplified and what content doesn't. And it's very important because there will be content which to a woman's eyes just immediately looks off. It just looks wrong, and it's not something which requires extensive debate, and discussion to decide whether this is something that deserves to be bumped up on the algorithm or not. But I think there are some differences, and to get more women into these critical positions, I think that really, helps increase the sensitivity and the responsiveness of companies to all these issues that we're dealing with. And I think this comes back to the mission that we have discussed earlier, which is not only do we want to afford more women the opportunity to have education in the STEM fields, but also to help get them into the industry, remain in the industry, and to ensure that their perspectives then can be represented in many of the critical functions that we've been talking about.
Absolutely.
We've seen one thing in Iceland which is quite funny but still serious, that because we, even though we are a bit bigger than, like you mentioned, in square kilometers, we are smaller as a nation. We are only 360,000 and we speak our own language, which is Icelandic. So we use English, of course, a lot, and we use Google Translate. And Google Translate, of course, is built up on AI a lot. And our words like ugly and lazy and boring and so negative words in the Google Translate, they were put in Icelandic in women's, because our words are not same in for speaking about males or women. So all these words were translated into a female version, but the word like energetic, pretty, and all these words, they were in male figures. So we found out and we complained, and I don't realize if it is because of the AI he sees on the internet that these words are more talked about for the other gender, or it is because the system is built up of a male who didn't realize what he was doing. But now he does. No. So, but this is just a one example of how, when we are trying to use the technology for advance, and we are really loving that the Icelandic language is now used more, and we have the technology to use it, and you can translate what I'm saying on social media finally, and so on. But there's also this gender bias which still comes with technology if we don't take a part in it.
Absolutely. And have you seen women in technology in Iceland driving, sort of new initiatives, for example, energy transition, climate tech? I read a very interesting article recently that women are actually, both on the legislative side and on the business side, really driving climate change.
Yes, they are. And I mean, with the work we have ahead, we just need all manpower, and then we cannot exclude women. So we need women in the tech solutions for the climate change as well as men. And there is, we see a lot of really great opportunities in Iceland where our carbon capturing companies that are led by women, and companies that are really will make a change for the world, that is run and led by women in Iceland.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing similar things here in Asia on the venture capital side of things, on the entrepreneurial side of things. A lot of women actually building and leading actually technology companies for climate change. So I see that. That's something that we really believe in She Loves Tech. Women entrepreneurs represent a new generation of disruptive thinking. Building solutions that we need for the post-COVID world that we live today.